Greetings and salutations. Welcome to another episode of The Emerging Composer. Today I'm just going to chatter on a little bit about why Palestrina. I have an obsession with Palestrina. And he was actually the focal point of much of my work at the Vermont College of Fine Arts. And counterpoint. You know, it's funny. I started studying counterpoint when I was about 55 or so. I became fascinated with it. And at first I started out to study it just because I think it's cool. It's an old-fashioned way of writing, right? Well, I found out, no, it's actually the foundation of much modern songwriting, believe it or not. So I'm going to work off a paper I wrote, short one, and we'll talk about why counterpoint should be important and why Palestrina should be an important part of our musical lives. Let me get to it right here. Why is a concept born out of a 16th century composer still relevant today? Why should we try to understand at least a little about counterpoint? I'm so glad you asked. I didn't start studying counterpoint until I was in my 50s for simple reasons. I didn't see the relevance. I was a jazz R&B player. What does counterpoint bring to that table? I ignored it.
A complete pile of arrogance, was I?
Did you hear Yoda in that last sentence? It was purposeful. During a music appreciation class I was teaching at a private arts academy, one year I was covering the Renaissance and its music. And while researching what made the music of that era stand out, I stumbled across a composer named Palestrina. His music was haunting and unlike anything I'd ever heard before. I quickly fell in love with it. His music soothed me and calmed me down. There was just something about it that hooked me and drew me in. As I researched this particular 16th century composer, I was astounded to find that 500 years after he lived, today's universities and colleges still look to Palestrina to teach and demonstrate counterpoint. How cool is it that someone could be such a genius that his style and technique would still be relevant 500 years after he died? It's pretty amazing. So, I started to research counterpoint and Palestrina's music in particular to see if I could find out exactly what made his music so wonderful to listen to. Initially, I thought I was studying something beautiful and for no other reason. It was just pretty, but with little relevance for today's music. So my adventure and my trip down the counterpoint rabbit hole began. I bought a book called Counterpoint in Composition by Felix Salzer and Carl Schachter. My intent was to plow my way through this book and master its content. And feeling generous, I gave myself a year to complete it. Arrogance popping its head up once more. 4 years later, I'm still in chapter 1. Was it that hard? No, quite the opposite. It was so understandable that whenever I would do one of these exercises in chapter 1, I would get inspired and I would write choral music and bury myself in that composition for long periods of time. It was so exciting. Each exercise prompted me to write something. As a result, I have worked with only first species counterpoint, chapter 1, for the last 4 years. I've only recently cracked the book at chapter 2. And am beginning to study second species counterpoint. Here's what I've discovered. The principles contained in writing good counterpoint are universal in their applications, and that is precisely why counterpoint is still relevant today. If you begin with the premise that counterpoint is the fine art of voice leading, it's not a huge leap to see its application to modern music. The goal of Palestrina, and any composer for that matter, is to write music that's pleasing to the ear. For example, in most of Palestrina's music, there was minimal dissonance. And where there was minimal dissonance, a good resolution to consonance. There was also minimal leaps, with most of the musical motion being steps and perhaps thirds. Sometimes a third is called a skip in some books. Anything greater than a third sometimes is called a leap. I just call them all leaps. Imagine my excitement. And I don't know why I went to this song, but it could be because I was teaching it to one of my students. When I looked at Elton John's hit, Can You Feel the Love Tonight? And realized his melody pretty much followed the same rules as drawn from the study of counterpoint. Now, does that mean Elton John consciously used counterpoint and a cantus firmus to frame that wonderful melody? I can pretty much assure you he did not. But how then can I attribute his melody to the rules of counterpoint and the cantus? Simple. His melody is mostly steps and skips, with only a few leaps. And when his melody leaps up, he steps back in the opposite direction. Because when writing a counterpoint melody, you leap up, you step down. You leap down, you step up. By and large, his melody conforms to the rules of writing a cantus and a counterpoint part. It's my current contention that most melodies of our popular songs are popular because, well, they're pleasing to the ear. That's why they call it pop music. It's popular with the masses. And we have Palestrina and his contemporaries to thank for building that foundation for future musicians. So, though I'm sure Elton didn't sit down with a counterpoint text and write his melody to "Can You Feel the Love Tonight" using counterpoint rules, the reason I can say that it adheres to these rules is because it's pleasing to the ear, and those are the rules that make a melody pleasing to the ear. There are certain rules of dissonance and consonance. There's rules of melodic flow, like leaping and stepping. Leap up, step down, step up. Things of that nature. And a good melody follows those rules instinctively. That's what our ear finds pleasant. That's why it's popular. Now, to get rid of a certain misconception, Palestrina, I doubt seriously if Palestrina wrote music with the rules in mind. Okay, what I just said, yes, is an oversimplification. I know that Palestrina was cognizant of the rules of writing good music. What I meant to say is that he didn't write music according to the rules. You write music, a composer writes music, what's in his heart, what's in his soul, what sounds good to him. And sometimes that doesn't necessarily follow the conventions of the day. Yes, he knew music theory. He had to. He couldn't do what he did without knowing it. And yes, he had to know whatever rules were around then. But the truth of the matter is, inspiration moves ahead of the rules. And I'll explain that here in a second. So I just wanted to clear that up. I know that Palestrina understood what makes music work. But he didn't write music according to the rules. He didn't set out with a list of rules to the right here of his score paper and say, okay, I have to follow these rules to do this. No, he did this. He wrote music. And then his knowledge of music, how music works, he uses to fine-tune it or to fix things that he had problems with. But I just wanted to clarify, he doesn't write music. No composer writes music from the foundation of the rules first. They write what sounds good. And then most composers that I've spoken to, the rules come into play when you hit a snag or a problem and you don't know how to resolve it. Then the rules come into play to help you get around that. But you don't start from the rules and go to the music. The music came first. Then the rules followed. All right, we'll now get back on track with what I was talking about previous. Because here's how the flow of it works. A composer composes a piece of music that people like. Then music theoreticians, music theory people come along and say, oh, that music sounded really pretty. Why does it sound pretty? And they look at it, they analyze it, they break it down, says, oh, you know what? When he skips up, he steps down. When he skips down, he steps up. Ooh, and they make it a rule. Music theory follows on the heels of music performance. Every generation has performers and composers that break the rules and do something that sounds really cool. And then music theorists come along and they break down what they did and find out why what they did sounds cool, and they make up a rule for it. So the end of it all being, today we have 18,000 music theory rules that are out there. But the truth of the matter is, Palestrina, other composers, wrote what was in their heart, and it was beautiful. And now we can break down his music and find out why it's beautiful and put those tools in our toolbox and use them in making our music beautiful. One particular conversation I had with the late Diane Mosier, one of my professors at Vermont College of Fine Arts, she was listening to me natter on about Palestrina at one time at lunch, and we're walking to a lecture together. She says, Paige, can I ask you a question? I said, sure. She says, what is it with you and Palestrina? Why the obsession? I told her, I said, his music's beautiful. It's captured my heart. Can't explain it. I'm just obsessed with it. She said, well, I understand that, and I understand you trying to write music in the style of Palestrina, which I was. She says, but you've got to understand something. This is really important. I want you to listen. I said, yeah. Now, Diane had what I call a velvet fist technique, a velvet glove technique. She'd hit you really hard with the truth, but she'd do it in such a way that somehow it didn't hurt as much as you think it might have or should have. She looked at me and says, you know you will never be Palestrina. You will never write music to imitate Palestrina fully. I said, okay. She says, but on the flip side of this, Palestrina could never be you. If Palestrina were alive today, he couldn't, try as he might, he could not be you. You can't be him, he can't be you. It's not about being another composer. She said, you have your own voice. You have your own thoughts. You have your own heart, your own passion. She said, understand his music so you can understand the mechanics and take those little tools, put them in your toolbox. But write the music that's in your heart. Don't get stuck in the rut of trying to be Palestrina. Because like I said, you'll never be Palestrina, but he'll never be you. So, why Palestrina for me? He inspires me. His music's beautiful. And he introduced me to counterpoint, for which I will be eternally grateful. It's not bad for a guy who's been dead since the 1600s, right? Mm-hmm. So, I wonder what else these masters know that I don't. Stay tuned. This is Mr. G. I'm out of here. Have a great day. Bye-bye.